Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Third Impact Anime Podcast. And on today's episode, please put that boulder back where it came from, or so help me, because we are talking about the 2013 anime sensation, the worldwide phenomenon, a relatively unknown series that you may have heard of in passing, Attack on Titan, Shingeki no Kyojin. Only one of the biggest anime of the last 10 years that finally wrapped up, I want to say last year. Is that correct, Ryan?
It ended tail end of last year.
After a number of production delays across the years, and a lot of Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, final season, chapter prologue, HD remix, the series is finally over, and all of us have histories with Attack on Titan in one way or another, so we thought we would start at the beginning and go through the whole series from the top, and eventually through a number of different episodes get through the whole thing. So you've already heard one voice. I've got Ryan with me.
Yay! And I also just got off of my training harness.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I can now balance, and I'm ready to go, sit here in zero gravity.
Do some whooshing.
Do some whooshing.
Glorious whooshing for the Survey Corps. And we've also got another podcast person on here, whatever we call ourselves. Who is here?
Meat sacks. That's the proper term for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's Tori, and after we record this, I'm going to go outside of these walls and touch grass because that's my birthright.
Are you, though?
No, I'm going straight to bed after this.
I'm sure many of the fine soldiers of the army or whatever would love a nap. So yes, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the first 13 episodes of Season 1 of Attack on Titan. But before we get into that, this is our first podcast of 2024. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
I did want to take a moment to for all of us to talk about maybe not our anime resolutions for 2024, because, resolutions are so played out, they're so easy to flake on, but what are your anime aspirations? What would you like to see yourself get to this year in the world of anime, or whatever that means to you? Tori, what do you think?
I think, personally, I'm going to try to maybe watch some stuff out of my genre comfort zone, and hopefully find some things that I actually like and enjoy, because I know they're out there. And then I think this year is the year that I'm going to try to find and commit to a long-running series that is not a pretty cure.
Would that happen to be Dragon Ball?
I don't know. It could be. I'm not committing to anything yet. I'm gonna go do my research. It probably, knowing me, will be some sports thing, but I'm gonna try to do something out of my comfort zone, like I mentioned. So we shall see what happens.
I mean, Dragon Ball. There's a ball there.
It's a good medium. Like, it'll get you.
I don't think they play basketball in Dragon Ball. I'm just saying.
No, they do martial arts.
You haven't seen it.
It has a tournament arc.
True.
What doesn't?
I don't think Attack on Titan has a tournament arc, but then again,
no, it doesn't.
They have a training arc. Okay.
That is true.
Okay, training arc, sure, but
okay.
Spoiler alert: Attack on Titan does not have a tournament arc.
Dang it, Ryan! Now, why am I even watching it at this point?
Because it doesn't have a tournament arc.
Oh well, you've sold me. I guess for me, my anime aspirations for 2024 are maybe to return to a few things that I've sort of let languish in the background. Like, there's a lot of anime and manga that I like, but that I've seen or read large portions of, but haven't really gone back to in a long time. Prime example of this is a series that I really love, Laid Back Camp, but I am 3 seasons and a movie behind on that. I own 6 volumes of the manga and haven't read any of them, but I love that series, and there's really no reason why I should keep putting it off. So maybe I'll finally go back to it. Another example would be Mob Psycho 100. I watched those first 2 seasons, loved them. It's one of my favorite anime of all time, but that 3rd season's just hanging out there. I haven't gotten to it even a little bit. So maybe playing pickup will be part of my aspirations for this year. Likewise, I think this will be my last thing, and I'm pretty sure I said this last year, but I say it every year because the problem never gets any better. I want to watch all of the anime that I own on physical disc so that I can maybe part ways with some of it and make room for some more.
Oh, that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but these are aspirations, not resolutions.
Gotcha. Yeah, so for me, I've been watching the one episode so far that's available of Delicious in Dungeon, and
tasty.
I never thought that a slime rice roll would make me hungry. Like, I know that anime always makes food look delicious, but I thought that this would be like the one exception of like, oh, it's going to be funny and not make me want to buy a cookbook inspired by it. But here we are so far, and it's really good so far. It's really creative. I like it a lot. Granted, I'm only an episode in, so can't really say that much about it. But aside from that, I didn't really watch much last year, so I'm looking to watch Frieren and Zom 100, as well as catch up. I'm so behind on Vinland Saga. I want to catch up on that, as well as Demon Slayer, and watch the second season of Ancient Magus Bride, which I watched the first season of that like 3 years ago at this point. So I honestly should go back and rewatch the first season because I don't remember anything that happened. I just remember liking it.
Well, there's a big guy with a weird head and a red-headed lady girl who's there too, and that's all you need.
That's pretty accurate, yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, honestly, Ancient Magus Bride would also qualify to be on my list because, Tori, you and I watched maybe 5 or 6 episodes of that show, and I was pretty into it, but, again, just kind of let it languish, and now here it is, 15 years later.
Oh, it surely feels like it.
Ancient Magus Bride was really well animated, and I don't remember any of the story beats other than magic shenanigans, and it was good. I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't like it, but there's so much media in the world. I don't remember everything I've watched. I just have a general recollection of, oh yeah, I remember liking that, or no, I didn't like that.
Yeah, and I think there's now like a spin-off manga. We have it at the library. It's I think it follows different characters in the same world, but that series has been pretty consistently around since it came out. I know there was a big gap in between the anime seasons, but there's plenty of content in that franchise, I think, for you to chew on.
Is the spinoff called The Young Magus Bride?
I don't think so. I think it's the more ancient Magus Bride, the ancienter Magus Bride.
Ancienter.
Or maybe the ancient Magus husband.
Groom.
Or maybe
Ancient Magus groom.
Ancient Magus non-gendered specific person friend. I don't know.
We'll put in the show notes once Austin goes and looks at the library.
That's right. Well, I hope we all are able to at least make a small dent in the things that we want to do for this year. No promises, just like always, but hopefully we are able to get around to at least one of these things. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Attack on Titan. So I did want to say that we do have a convention coming up in March. We are going to be at RetCon, which is really more like a sci-fi, fantasy, cryptids, literature, weirdo sci-fi convention thing. But for some reason, they did allow us to be there as guests and to do panels about Japanese cartoons. So we're very grateful for that, even though it's a little bit different than the normal convention circuit that we go on. But we will be there in Cary, North Carolina, which is pretty close to Raleigh, from March 1st till the 3rd of 2024. And we hope that you come out to see some of our panels. We don't know exactly what's going to be on the schedule this year, but we'll be doing something, and that something will be cool. So please come see us at RetCon.
Probably by the time you listen to this, we'll have submitted panels, and they'll be roughly on the way of telling us what we can run.
That's right. But we can't tell you the future.
Well, I can, but I have rules about not doing that.
You have to keep it concealed.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Speaking of no spoilers, Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan began as a manga series written by Hajime Isayama that ran in Bisatsu Shonen magazine from 2009 until 2021 for a total of 34 volumes. It's based on a one-shot that Isayama pitched to Shonen Jump in 2006 that they ended up rejecting before he pitched it to Kodansha, where it was picked up and made into what we know as Attack on Titan.
Man, I bet they
You know,
regret
Shonen
that.
Jump is shaking their head.
Yeah.
Man. Well, you know, Shonen Jump, they can afford to take an L every now and again because they take so many consistent W's. I guess they can't win them all.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
The series was first adapted into anime in 2013, a whole 11 years ago.
Woof.
Adapted by Studio Wit, with an initial 26-episode first season, with subsequent seasons released over the course of the next 6 years, until the most recent entries were animated by Studio Mappa. And Mappa did I want to say the last 2 seasons, the last of which finally ended last year in 2023.
Would you say that their work on Attack on Titan really put them on the Mappa?
Well, see, that would be hilarious if they were a little unknown studio before they worked on Attack on Titan, but they were very well known before that, Ryan. You should know this.
So no is your answer? You would say no, this didn't put them on the Mappa?
Well, I think for the sake of the pun, yes.
Okay.
So the first studio, which is the production studio behind this first core that we're going to be talking about for at least this episode and for most of the parts upcoming, is Studio Wit. They were founded in 2012 as a subsidiary of Production IG, a very long-running and prolific anime studio. Attack on Titan was actually their first production. They're still extremely prolific to this day with projects like Spy Family, along with Studio Cloverworks, The Ancient Magus Bride, which we mentioned in the beginning, and other Tetsuro Araki-directed original anime, Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress. Tetsuro Araki, of course, is the director of the series and a founding staff member of Studio Wit. He was a longtime storyboard artist before directing Death Note in 2007 with Madhouse. He later directed High School of the Dead in 2010, where he collaborated with director of photography Kazuhiro Yamada and 3D director Shuhei Yabuta, both of which he'd bring onto the team again for Attack on Titan. In 2011, he directed the original anime series Guilty Crown, where he worked with music composer Hiroyuki Sawano, who composed the score for Attack on Titan and pretty much all of Araki's series since then. So I imagine we were all familiar, if not by name, at least familiar with some of Araki's anime prior to Attack on Titan.
Yeah, I didn't really know what he had done prior to you mentioning a couple, but yes, I love Death Note. I actually rewatched that at some point last year, and he did a really good job on it.
Yeah, I think one thing that people really connect the through line from Death Note to Attack on Titan is just those really exaggerated, like, sweeping, jittery scenes to show off the intensity of light doing evil things that really sort of comes through in the frenetic action of Titan.
I remember when this show first came out, I was still at NC State at the time. We hadn't even met yet. It was the before 4 times. And we always would watch one new show per week, and then the 2 shows we were currently watching, and then a dealer's choice of whatever we felt like at that week. And one week happened to be Attack on Titan, and the opening pops with just the Titan looming over, and we're like, ooh. And then the intro pops off, and everybody's like, all right, I'm really here for this, because that intro was sick. And then once we watched that, I went back and watched everything that was currently available. So yeah, he did a fantastic job with just reeling people in. Granted, part of that was, the writing of it, but he made it look good.
Well, you kind of mentioned it already, but my next question was going to be basically to both of you and myself, like what our first memories of encountering Attack on Titan were. So you kind of outlined your story there, but did you have anything to add?
I remember we had gone out for Chinese food after watching the first episode, and I was like, man, that looks like it'll be a pretty good show. And they're like, yeah, by the way, Eren dies in episode 7. And I was like, thanks for the spoiler, but I think you're lying to me. And then I get to episode 7 and he gets eated. and then I was like, well, okay then.
What kind of clown folk were you spending your time with that would just so blatantly shout out a spoiler? Oh, wait, I remember. This is 2013. People just did that back then.
Yeah, pretty much.
What an annoying time to be alive.
For me, I don't really remember. So this would have been like when I was keeping up, when I was insane and like would keep up with almost every single thing that looked relatively interesting seasonally. So I would be watching like multiple shows at one time, and now like trying to get me to watch one thing is like pulling teeth. But
did that include Guilty Crown and High School of the Dead at the time?
I never watched High School of the Dead, and I watched Guilty Crown and not liking it a whole bunch. I do remember that. Like, what else was I watching around that time? I don't know, but I remember basically it's kind of like what Ryan said. Like, I remember the first episode happened and I was like immediately hooked. And this was around the time or two when I was very active online in like fan spaces. And so like everybody was like, yeah, this is the show of the season. So everybody was talking about it and we were keeping up with it every week. So there was like a really big engagement and it was like this community thing. And just like being so in the midst of that, and even for like a little bit of like the later seasons before I dropped off, it was still really strong. Like the show even now still has like, well, not as much as it was, but people still pretty into it. But yeah, it was kind of just that like I picked it up as a flavor of the week thing and then really liked it because it immediately hooked me like right away.
Thinking back on Attack on Titan, it feels like it's sort of the beginning of the modern era of anime fandom in some ways, and sort of also has reflections of like the previous era. I don't really remember if this was being simulcast on Crunchyroll at the same time that it was coming out in Japan. It might have been, but at that time I wasn't really paying attention. I was still using mostly like piracy sites to watch all of my shows.
Yeah.
Which was, still pretty normal for the average anime fan back in like 2013 or so.
Yeah, there was not nearly what we have today back then.
No, not even close. And we can kind of credit the popularity of Attack on Titan for sort of raising all ships, so to speak, whenever it comes to anime, because people were watching this show that had never watched anime before in their life or had only seen Pokemon or something, because the common reprieve that I even used myself to pitch it to some people is like, it's like The Walking Dead, but better. Which is really quite funny, because in reading interviews with Isayama, he's not particularly a huge fan of like horror stuff so much. It's like the idea for the Titans is like more so he wanted something like kind of ugly and unsettling, but not like horrific necessarily. Like he doesn't really talk about having too much affection for like zombie stuff. He more so talks about like giant monster, like kaiju stuff. It's like that's more what he's coming at it from, and stuff like Evangelion and sort of the horror in like the monstrosity of it all, but not in the like
definitely
the zombie sense.
Yeah, it never struck me as like a zombie show other than the fact that they were, of course, literally eating people. But
Sure.
like no, it's more of the show where you feel the emotion instead of being scared of the Titans. It's like you feel what the people are going through, which is
Hmm.
just dread and terror mostly. It's not like the same types of emotions like you would feel in like a horror scenario. It's different.
Sure, and it keeps going back to that more action oriented perspective, because even though the event, like the Titans themselves, are horrifying and the events happening to the characters are horrifying, but it is very much an action series, not a horror one. Maybe one that shares horror DNA, but anyway, like I definitely remember people pitching it that way at the time because The Walking Dead was such a huge cultural phenomenon back then. And I think that maybe that through line pushed a lot of people to want to check it out. Because I remember showing it to people who were not anime fans, and they watched it and they were pretty into it. But then it also seemed like pretty much every anime fan like stopped what they were doing and checked out Attack on Titan.
It definitely had the Sword Art Online effect where like you could easily get people like kind of just to piggyback off that, like easily get people who had no concept of anime to like sit down and watch
Hmm.
this because it was just so absurd and like
Yeah.
I don't know. Definitely.
And pretty accessible. Like
Yeah.
I think even it's a show because of the way, because of like the fantasy world is so European inspired, and all of the names and characters are more, I guess, palatable to a Western audience that isn't necessarily familiar with anime isms or like the Japanese-ness of anime. It's like you can show this to them and it'll feel like a Western cartoon. Like there's nothing super
Yeah.
anime about the whole thing on it from a superficial perspective. So I think that also helped as well. I think nowadays things are a lot different. Audiences, generally speaking, are more in tune with international media, but that wasn't necessarily the case 11 years ago.
I'm trying to remember back then because it really was a long time ago. But I think that was a lot of the era as well, where a lot of anime fans were watching so many shows per week. So Attack on Titan was definitely the one that got talked about the most. But I remember it being compared to like things at the time. I don't remember what those were because they weren't nearly as memorable, but people were consuming a lot, and the fact that this was one of the ones that actually stood out, it like has a lot going for it.
And I guess for me, if I had to think about how I discovered it, it was probably just through word of mouth, or from Tumblr posts, or from people I knew at community college talking about it. And I remember checking it out through piracy streaming sites first, and then I downloaded some high quality torrents of it later. And I got one of the fan subgroups who insisted on calling the Titans the Aotenas. Do y'all remember that?
Aotenas? No, I don't.
It's like
Oh.
some other adjacent word to Titan or monster or something like that. And this particular fan subgroup, again, I don't know the name and I'm not going to look it up because I don't care that much. But it's like they were specific about being like, we are using this word, not Titan. And I had a couple of episodes that I downloaded where all the subtitles said Aotenas. And I'm just like, I don't know what this is, but I think it probably means Titan, and then it just took over as Attack on Titan later on, which
For like a 2010 subgroup, that sounds correct.
it sounds very much like something that people would get their
Yeah.
pants in a knot over.
No,
Yeah,
subgroups
wow.
back then I remember had such a culture of like we are more in tuned with Japanese culture than you plebeians, so our translation is better than those of Funimation. Like
Right.
it was such a weird mentality.
And nowadays, most fan subgroups are just rips from the official streams.
Well, yeah.
I was instantly taken with it. I think show does a really great job of pacing its cliffhangers, which makes for great television. Like, pretty much every episode ends on some sort of little hint of what's to come, and it's a great way to sort of get you invested. Which I think played a lot in the show's favor for the first season that it came out with those initial 26 episodes, but really did the show no favors whenever there was such a long gap between season 1 and season 2.
Heck, even season 2 and season 3 I think was longer.
Right. And we'll certainly talk about that a little bit more later. But I was instantly taken with the aesthetic design. I thought the artistry was really strong. I don't think I had seen anime look so modern until then. Like, it had this peak for the time, peak digital animation look to it, with a lot of detail and animation that I don't think could have been done in maybe a previous era, or maybe not quite in the same way. So it really felt like an animation showcase for the medium at the time. Like, it looked better than a lot of things that were coming out then.
Yeah, that's a common theme you hear with a lot of shows that do well. And I think it ultimately just comes down to, like, the more effort you put into something, the better it's going to do. Mm-hmm. Like, if you make something memorable for looking good, like, the plot will follow pretty much. Like, people will just become invested in the plot because they like looking at it. There are definitely exceptions to that. It's not a hard rule, but I've noticed that a lot, like with stuff we talk about or things that are popular. It's like, oh, it looked really good for the time. And I'm like, okay, but maybe that's not it looking good for the time. Maybe that's it setting a new standard for the time.
Yeah, I think things that are visually striking, just, again, they strike you visually. You know, there's really no other way to say it.
Right.
Let's get a little bit more into what Attack on Titan is specifically about. So, Tori, can you give us the general series overview for at least this first season, like where we are starting off?
Yes. So set in a post-apocalyptic world where the remains of humanity live behind walls protecting them from giant humanoid titans, Attack on Titan follows protagonist Eren Yeager along with friends Mikasa Ackerman and Armin Arlet. I think is how you pronounce that.
Arlert.
I think the R rolls
dramatic.
and it's kind of silent. Yeah.
It's like
Arlert.
Like, yeah, something like that.
Armin Aardvark.
Okay. Armin Aardvark. Okay. When a colossal titan breaches the wall of their hometown, titans destroy the city and eat Eren's mother. Vowing vengeance, Eren joins the elite Survey Corps, a group of soldiers who fight against titans. It chronicles Eren's journey with the Survey Corps as they fight against the Titans while investigating their origin and history.
I refuse to accept that Eren is the protagonist. It's actually Mikasa. That's my theory.
That's what a lot of people think.
Much like Final Fantasy X, Yuna is the main character. Mikasa is the main character.
Hell yeah.
That is all. Goodbye.
I will agree with that for now.
For now. I think the show forces us to accept Eren as the main character, but he's less interesting to me.
So I think now's
reality.
Yeah, I think now's a good time to bring up also that the way we're structuring these reviews is we are reviewing specifically these arcs without future knowledge, because Austin and Tori don't have future knowledge, but I do. I'm trying
I have
not to
out of context future knowledge because so much has been spoiled for me.
Sure, but I'm trying not to let what I know about the later parts of the show get in the way of discussing this as its own thing.
I respect
Sure.
that. You're free to dance around the fire of future knowledge, but do not set yourself ablaze with the fire of future knowledge. Is my metaphor working? Is this thing on?
It passes.
Okay, thank you. As long as you understand what I'm trying to say. But
Oh, I
anyway,
understood
yes,
what you were trying to say. I'm not sure if they're going to understand what you're saying.
I don't care if they do or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk a little bit about our voice cast here. So we've talked about we name dropped our three main leads, who are just three of an innumerably large cast of characters, many of which we could spend the next 45 minutes naming all of their voice actors for. But I think
And
we're
I
going to
tried.
save some of them for when they're a little bit more relevant to the story that we're talking about at hand. So we'll just talk about the main three here. Tori, do you want to talk about our voices for the main three in both English and Japanese?
We have Aaron. In English, he is voiced by Bryce Papenbrook, who is Kirito in Sword Art Online, and Nosuke in Demon Slayer, and Shiro Emiya in Fate Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works. In Japanese, Aaron's voiced by Yuki Kaji, who was Kenma in Haikyuu, Koichi in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable, and Todoroki in My Hero Academia.
Gotta
Mikasa.
say, with Bryce
Oh,
Papenbrook, I was a little bit skeptical whenever they first announced this dubcast because, well, let me do an aside real quick. So I remember very, very vividly that Funimation made a whole campaign at the time doing the rollout for the dub voice cast of this show, which came out, this was not the time of simul dubs. Like, that wasn't much of a thing yet. It had been dabbled in, but it really wasn't what it is today, not even close. So
No.
Funimation was still very much in the perspective of, okay, we're going to announce that we licensed the show, and then 6 months will pass, we'll announce the dub cast, we'll put out a trailer, and then like a couple months after that, they'll actually release like the first 13 episodes of something on a disc as part one, and then do part two like sometime the next year. But rightfully so, this show had a pretty hyped up cycle for announcing all of the voice casts for it, because I remember distinctly they put out like a new trailer like every couple weeks being like, oh, the voice of Jean is Mike McFarland, or and here's a quick clip sort of showing that, oh, the voice of Annie is Lauren Landa, and here's a clip of her talking, and oh, here's and then they would keep going until it got down to the main characters, and they did those reveals, and I just remember them making a huge deal out of it. And I remember it mostly because I would show a lot of those in my anime club at the time, because I was the resident dub lover and kind of still am. So I made sure to show those off because I thought it was interesting. Most of the people in the room had already seen the show in Japanese, so I was like, here, check out a little quick preview of how it's going to sound in English.
I do remember it was like a really big deal when the dub was coming out because of how popular it was. And I do remember the first trailer I saw for it where Bryce Papenbrook basically introduced the trailer and, hyped up how excited he was to be playing the lead character, Eren Yeager. And then they showed the trailer, and of course there was a lot of screaming in it because,
Of course.
of
yeah,
course there was.
Um,
And to your point, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I am the resident dub lover. I watch everything in dub whenever possible because I just like it. And
We'll fight behind Walmaria later.
Okay, sounds good. But I remember enjoying the dub, but the sub for me for this specifically was so well done because you can just hear the rawness in the tone that it's basically unparalleled to me compared to the dub. Like, you didn't have nearly as much visceral anger in their voices, which is what I loved about the sub so much.
So on that note, Tori, you want to continue the cast?
I was just gonna say this is actually the first time I watched the show dubbed. Like, I've seen the first season collectively probably like 4 times just amongst showing it to other people. And like until just the other week, I'd like never sat down and watched it in English. And I will say, I love Bryce Papenbrook as Inosuke, not so much as Aaron.
Agreed.
Anyway, so moving on, we have Mikasa, who in English is voiced by Trina Nishimura, who was Makise Kurisu in Steins Gate, and Mari in the Funimation dub of the rebuild of Evangelion movies. And she was Earphone Jack in My Hero Academia. In Japanese, she is voiced by Yui Ishikawa, who was Violet in Violet Evergarden and 2B in Nier Automata. Armin, in English, is voiced by Jesse James Grell, who was Tsukuyomi in My Hero Academia, Yuri Katsugi in Yuri on Ice, and Inoza in Psychopaths. In Japanese, Armin is voiced by Marina Inoue, who was Momo in My Hero Academia, Yoko in Gurren Lagann, and the femme protag in Persona 3.
You know, I never would have guessed that Yoko, Littner, and Armin are the same voice.
Especially the way, like, Armin yells. I don't know, there's just something about Armin's, like in English and Japanese, the way Armin yells is just so entertaining to me.
Yeah, Armin's yelling is...
Like,
I find it hilarious that we're judging... I love that we're judging based on their yells, but with this show, it really matters.
Oh my gosh.
It does. I mean, there's a lot of screaming.
Yeah, there's so much screaming in this show.
So we talked sort of already about sort of the climate of where we were when we first encountered Attack on Titan, but what did we think of it when we first saw it, and how does that stack up to how we feel about it now? I guess for me, I mean, I was pretty smitten with it instantly. I watched it this first season a number of times. I was really into it. I even cosplayed Commander Irvin, which was really fun. That's actually how Tori and I met, which is really cute.
I don't think I knew you back then, but I can totally see it.
I'll send you pictures. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that was
I was
how
super
we
into
met.
it.
Yeah.
It was. You were cosplaying Krista.
Mm-hmm.
I can also see that.
Yep. So back when I actually did cosplay, I remember I had to reorder my jacket like 3 times because it kept coming in too small. I had to keep adding an extra X because I didn't order a lot of cosplay at the time, and I have pretty broad shoulders. So I ended up having to wear like a Japanese quadruple XL or something like that to get it to even remotely attempt to fit me. But anyway, putting on those belts was a nightmare. I would not recommend anyone cosplay Attack on Titan.
The boots and the belts and
I had a Survey Corps jacket, not jacket, poncho. But that's pretty much the extent of what I cosplayed. It was a very casual cosplay because it was just, I like ponchos. They're very comfy. And yeah.
Those ponchos were the thing to wear at cons for a while.
Oh yeah. I would have people coming up to me and doing the salute, and I'm just like, you do realize if you do this on the street, people are going to think we're like either in a radical political group or a cult.
Both accurate and both described as being an anime fan.
Yup.
Yeah, right. I was like so deep into it. I was like active in the fandom on Tumblr, like online in general. I found a jacket that kind of looked like a Survey Corps jacket, and I put a patch on the back of it, and I wore it regularly because it looked like Annie's hoodie under her jacket because it had like a built-in hood, and it was that same brown. I put a patch on it, wore it all the time. I was deep. There was no pulling me from this. Completely absorbed and smitten, like you said, with it. And then when I watched it again this time, I was like, damn, this is kind of boring, but like I'm still really intrigued. Like, God, they talk so much. And how did me 11 years ago deal with this? Because like me now, I'm like, they're talking way too much and they're drawing this out way too much. And there's so much internal monologuing, and I'm like, not that I'm not enjoying it, but I definitely have a lot of like different feelings about it now.
I definitely had a similar thing. Like, I think a lot of it comes with the first time, like Attack on Titan, one of the big appeals is the mystery behind it. Like,
Yes.
what is in the basement? We really wanted to know what was in the basement.
Oh my god.
And now you know those beats leading up to it, so it's less thrilling this time because you
Yes.
already know what's happening. And that's a
That's
problem
right.
with a lot of recurring television in general. It's like, unless the journey is substantially amazing, it's really hard to recapture the magic of watching it the first time.
I like to think that when I start getting into the parts that I don't know, that maybe that feeling will come back.
Yeah,
I'm with you there. I kind of
That's-
expect that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
that's definitely valid. But there is a lot to be said for a first time viewing of something.
Right.
definitely.
I think all of us, so maybe not Ryan so much, but Tori and I both are. There was definitely a period of time that lasted, at least for me, until doing this podcast, where I was basically like a lapsed Attack on Titan fan, where I liked it for a really long time, and then probably after season 2, which again took so long to come out that a lot of my interest and my fervor had even waned then. And if you go back to the very beginning of this podcast, one of our first episodes was a watch along of episode 1 of season 2, and we've been doing this podcast since 2017, and that was pretty much the last time I was super interested in Attack on Titan. I think after season 2, I just wasn't as interested as I was whenever I first finished season 1. And then I just had heard some whispers about a lot of the controversies surrounding the story, and I was just kind of disconnected from the whole thing, wasn't super invested in coming back into it, and just sort of let it languish. But now that it's finally over, again, it's going to be nice to finally go back to it, finish it up, and see how I feel about it, once it's all said and done.
Yeah, like, I'm glad it's done, because it for sure overstayed its welcome. It did not need to take 10 years to tell this story. But I am very glad that I stuck through it and watched it to the end, because it was a satisfying end. And without going too far into it, I do
We'll get there when we
enjoy-
get there.
yeah, but I do enjoy the story as a whole. Like, I was the same way. I read up until the beginning of season 4. And then life happened and I just stopped reading. And I just waited for the anime to come out. And then I didn't want to read because I was like, the anime's been really good and I don't want to ruin the ending for myself. And yeah, I definitely had a peak with this show that very much was down in a valley by the time it finished.
So let's talk about this first season, huh?
Yep.
So it sort of opens on this very medieval-looking pastoral town located, behind these gigantic walls. And we've got our 3 main characters here, and they're sort of, their precious little life, I guess, to steal a Scott Pilgrim reference. And then all of that is shattered in an instant whenever a big ol' Titan shows up and kicks a hole in one of the outer walls, which they had, I think, according to the lore, they had not had a Titan attack in over 100 years. Like, they knew the Titans were still out there. They were still sending the military forces outside of the walls to see if they could make any headway on defeating the Titans, but hadn't really made a whole lot of progress, and they were just sort of at a stalemate. But humanity was all behind these big walls, and then suddenly everything just goes to crap. Aaron's father is displaced. You don't see him again for a really long time. You don't know what's up with that guy. His mother is tragically eaten. along with most of their neighbors, and then they basically have to flee to the inner wall as refugees, and then their life just kind of is pretty bad for a long time until there's a pretty significant time skip where all three of our main protagonists decide to enlist in the military, because what else are you going to do in this highly impoverished world where there's a ruling class and a peasantry, but the ruling class is pretty incompetent, only looking out for themselves, only concerned with their own safety, and really, what else are these poor refugee kids with nothing supposed to do but, I guess, join the military?
Yeah, well, this show loved its time skips, especially in the beginning, because they kind of skirt past this in like a little explainer at the beginning of episode 2, but the time between episodes 1 and 2 is a full year. Like they don't they don't explain that well, but they mention over the course of the past year, we lost about 20% of the population, and they had like an operation to try to retake Walmaria. And it like, you don't realize that on a first watching, because it's kind of said very subtly, and you're more so still reeling from the, oh my God, what just happened? But yeah, there was a full year between those two episodes, and then there's another 3 years between episodes 2 and 3, and then it's another 2 years of training. So there's a lot of time that passes in like the first very short amount of episodes.
And that comes to a screeching halt, because then we spend like the next 9 episodes on an event that takes place over
on
a couple
one
hours.
Day. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I forgot just how long the Battle of Trost was.
It's like basically half the season.
Yes.
Yeah. It's 9 parts, I think.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I think, all things considered, I think I liked the rapid pace of the first 5 episodes. I think that's maybe the strongest part, because it gets you in with that meaningful hook, and then shows you really clearly how these kids' life is like forever altered by these events. But I understand, this is an action series. They want to get to the part where the kids can do some fighting and get to the part where they can introduce the big cast of characters, most of which are, fellow military recruits around the 3 main characters, and their commanding officers and other supporting characters that you meet pretty early and then gradually learn more and more about as the series unfolds, because it does pretty much follow the same characters from stem to stern. At least that's what I have gathered.
Yeah. It did kind of tease you that there might be a larger cast at the very beginning of the Battle of Trost, when Eren has his little squad. They're all hyped up and excited to go fight the Titans, and then every single one of them gets killed.
Sure, I mean, you gotta have...
Yeah, you gotta have cannon fodder.
Yeah, you do.
But that was like... That episode, the first time I watched it, I remember was just like, oh, that's gonna be this kind of show. Okay. Because they just all died in like pretty brutal ways.
No one is safe because they'll be standing there talking and like delivering some really heartfelt, like, yeah, guys, we got this. We're going to do it. We're going to, reclaim everything. And then like 2 scenes later, they're getting smashed into the roof of a house by a Titan. So.
You
it was just like, it was like, yeah. It was just, Eren was like gliding through the city, and you can tell he's like excited and he's like pumped up, and then a Titan flies at them and eats one of his friends.
Gosh, I know.
Yeah, it's harrowing, and I think to me, maybe it's that sort of feeling, that sort of tone, that sort of vibe that really does lend itself well to the Walking Dead comparison, because that show is also like that. Like a lot of zombie fiction is like that, about the author wanting the audience to see that no one is safe and that anybody could get offed in any minute, which is very much true in the early parts of Titan. I think maybe they cool it later on, where they realize that the amount of characters that people really love it's like they've gotten more attached to them, so they can't quite kill them off as easily, especially not as much as they do in the beginning. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I can't really. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk about the
yeah.
future
No,
at all.
no comment necessary. We're
Yeah.
just talking about this first part. So yes, you mentioned the Battle of Trost, and that basically the conceit of that is that once our main characters are sort of out of military school, they're given an option to pick like sort of what branch of the military they want to go into, and they have to do like certain things in order to qualify for them. Like I think you have to be like a super duper elite to go into the military police, and they basically get to, you know, frick off to the capital and be like the king's personal guard or whatever. So it's a pretty cushy job, and some of them want to go in that direction, and other ones would rather, you know, be out in the field. Aaron, of course, is insane, so he wants to be in the scouting regiment, which is in charge of going out beyond the walls, and that's kind of the POV of like the military that we see most often in the show. But I think one thing that stood out to me watching it this time versus whenever I watched it the first time is trying to keep an eye out for how the military and the Titans and the war between them really impacts the everyday civilians of this world. And a lot of that just kind of washed off me whenever I watched it for the first time, because the show doesn't really focus that direction too often because our main characters are in the military. But there are some pretty poignant moments where we get to see how this society is structured to, you know, basically treat the everyday person as like very, very disposable. Like there's the whole scene whenever the Battle of Trost has first begun and the inner wall is breached yet again and the Titans are pouring in. There's the merchant who's trying to get his cart through the gate, and his cart is like full of all of his merchandise, and he's like, I gotta get it to the other side, I gotta save my business. Whereas there's like a huge mound of people who can't get through because he's trying to get his cart through. And I'm just like, okay, this really does show like the very clear priorities of this world. It's like it's not set up to really help the average person here. It's like Mikasa sort of puts that on blast a bit, where she sort of gives the merchant, you know, she kind of hands him his butt for lack of a better word. And I'm just like, that's a really poignant scene, and I kind of want there to be more of that, but I just don't expect the show to go in that direction because I know it will get very focused on our main cast. But I really loved looking at scenes like that this time around because it gave me like a fuller picture of what this world looks like more broadly outside of the eyeballs of just the soldiers and the Titans and the spectacle of battle.
Yeah, the spectacle is definitely where this show shines. It's where it's really well animated. I think in terms of the pacing, Trost itself is technically 9 parts, but it does feel like they actually split it in half at a fairly good point, because once we see Eren Titan, that's where the initial fighting ends, and then we have a bit of a reprieve from fighting to instead they're just trying to blow him up with a cannon. And then we have the part where he's carrying the boulder and they're having to defend Eren to retake Trost. But those 2 parts do feel fairly separate, but it is still just a lot of Trost.
Not any one particular scene, but I noticed more this time around, more like foreshadowing things, or like it's like there was one scene that stuck out to me, I think kind of when they were in the beginning of their training, where like Eren is eating a piece of bread and he bites into the bread while he's recalling how his mom was like eaten by a Titan. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But there's also like
Visual
a lot of
metaphor.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get
Traumatic
at. A visual metaphor. But for instance, like the foreshadowing, I don't want to get into like too much of it, but I know one that stuck out to me as well was when they're also in the training, and you know how he like falls over and like hits his head really hard?
Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite part.
Yeah. So when they're eating, I think in that same kind of scene, you see steam coming out of his head. And I don't think I caught that until like this last watch. And some people are probably like, "Oh, that was so obvious. I caught that like the very first time." But
Without going into detail, the show, it really did do a good job of foreshadowing from the very beginning. Like even stuff that
yeah,
happens in season 4 that you have no context for,
uh-huh.
there are nods to it at the very start.
I think another thing though that got me was I think it was happening when Aaron was in Titan form and lifting the boulder, and he was just going on his monologue of like, you got to keep going no matter what. And I'm just like, that's right. That's so right. No matter how cruel, he's like, no matter how cruel the world is or how unfair the world is, you just got to keep fighting or something. And I was like, this is why I love shonen shows.
Yeah, I mean, it
uh,
is very much pulling on that same, tried and true tradition of, heroic fighting spirit and hardworking guts and that sort of thing. But I think in this show, like, I mean, you could say that's about other things as well, but I think it's characterized as being so, um, a pretty radical way of approaching the world in this, because it's so easy to see how doomed everyone is, because they are, like, these odds are insurmountable. It's like if the walls come down, there's, like, for the most part, literally nothing anyone can do. Like, the military can only do so much, but they're more like a patchwork thing. And like a lot of the characters in this show are just regular people. Not everybody has super titan powers. I mean, we'll find out later that more people do, but it really is a lot about the triumph of the human spirit and all of that. But it also doesn't shy away from being super real about how dour and dire things really can get and often are, especially when it comes to war. Because, man, dude, these characters go through some serious trauma, and you see
yeah.
that pretty much on display pretty clearly in a lot of different ways.
Like, I think of when you're talking about that, I'm like, oh man, poor Marco. And like
Yeah.
how he was trying his best to like be there for his squad and like, save John when all that was going down, and like everything was like you thought it was gonna be a happy ending, and then it cuts to like him just dead in an alleyway, and I'm like, no, that's not okay. Still
Yep.
all these years traumatized by that, but I think it just goes to kind of show the cruelty and the cruelty of the world they're in, where you think something's going to end happy, and then at any moment that can kind of be taken away.
I'm glad you mentioned John, because I think in this rewatch, he's the character I have most warmed up to.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think initially he just kind of got on my nerves whenever I watched the show for the first time. I thought he was, too abrasive, he would clash too often with Aaron. But I'm just like, this time watching around, I'm just like, well, Aaron really is kind of insufferable sometimes. Like, he's got this
Aaron's
chip on his
annoying as
shoulder
hell.
about. Yeah, he's got this chip on his shoulder where he feels like he's got this savior complex where he feels like he should be the one that saves the whole world and everything. And even before we find out he has titan powers, it's just like, his motivations are very personal, almost to the exclusion of the group. Like, I think of much more, like, if he really wanted to accomplish his goal of eradicating the Titans, maybe he wouldn't be so individualistic about the whole thing, and realize that he needs to, work together with others about it. And you see this in his speech, or his conversation with Mikasa, whenever they're sort of conniving about how to escape from the military police. He's just like, don't go with me. I have to do this by myself. And there's one way that you could read that as like, oh, he's just wanting to make sure that, she's not in danger or whatever. But I think that sort of fundamentally misses the part that no, she wouldn't be, because she's clearly very competent at being a good soldier. So I don't think anything he can do can really put her in danger, because she's so gifted as a soldier. It's like it would be leaning on her skills to take advantage of that. And just like, Aaron is very constantly very self-focused, to the detriment of other characters around him, I think. I mean, I don't think he's quite a villain necessarily, especially not here. I mean, he's definitely it shows heroic tendencies, and his motivations are good and noble, but it's like he gets in his own way. And Jean, I think, sort of, there's some scenes where he really does take charge and sort of rallies a group together to sort of collectively solve a problem rather than him relying solely on like his own abilities to save the day. And I think that's kind of why I have got to come around to respecting him a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good boy.
I've monologued a bit, so I want you guys to jump in. Are there other characters you wanted to talk about right now within the context of what we see them do in this season? So just start with one and go.
I thought Armin's arc later on of being like, I'm not a burden to my friends. This is how they see me, and they care about me, and they trust me, and they're putting their lives literally in my hands. I feel like that hit a lot differently as an adult, and I thought that was very well done, and it was nice to see Armin kind of gain that confidence.
I love that too. I mean, I think we see Armin's growth pretty clearly just in a short period of time, but I think that puts him in really great contrast to Eren, who thinks about things so differently. And yet these two, kids grew up together. They have a lot of shared life experiences, but it shows how, different personalities and different motivations applied to the same problems can really create huge differences in the way people approach them.
I kind of can't really talk about him without going into like a little bit into the future, like not super far. But Armin has one of the better arcs because he starts as, well, useless. And then he basically finds his niche in an army filled with people who are incredibly strong or brave. And he figures out that what he is incredibly smart. And he is brave in his own right, but he doesn't really show it immediately. He's very afraid of his own shadow at first. Mm-hmm. But I think that of all the main three, he goes through the best character arc with that. Eren pretty much stays angry. Mikasa stays stoic. So Armin has the best growth of anyone.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned briefly Mikasa's stoicism, and I'm like, I think the show again does a pretty good job showing that like her stoicism is not like a constant. It's very contextual and depends on who she's talking to. Like she very much has this protector kind of instinct when it comes to Eren and Armin, both pretty equally. Eren a little bit more, but Armin, she certainly is very attached to him as well. And she's not the Ice Queen. I think maybe she is often remembered as being. Like she can be pretty warm sometimes, even if she's standoffish. But
she shows emotions more with her actions than her words or face.
Right, which is yeah.
Yeah, when she thought Eren was dead, she went berserk and just started charging headfirst and killing everything in sight without really, changing her face. So
right,
yeah.
And even that I thought that was a good scene as well because it showed like she's also not perfect either because she basically like goes on that rampage not realizing like her gas tanks are about to run out and then she just like basically face plants into a building, which which I love that because it shows like even the characters who you think always have it together, like they don't always, like they can let their emotions get the better of them. And I think in a lot of ways that's what this show is about because we constantly have characters everywhere letting their emotions sort of get the better of them, and that will probably only get worse.
Yeah, probably.
So basically, in this season, like you said, it's sort of the midpoint of the show. It's revealed that Eren has the ability to turn into a Titan somehow because of some science nonsense related to his dad, which we don't really know the full details of in this season yet. But he basically is able to somewhat harness his Titan energy for a good cause of, plugging up the busted hole in the inner wall, preventing the Titans from advancing any further. But at the very end of the season, we find out that he's caught the eye of pretty much all of the military higher-ups who are very interested in these powers that he has, and he's been apprehended by Commanders Irvin and Levi, and that's sort of where we leave off.
Yep.
So
that hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Yep. So any other reflections about this first 13 episode chunk before we kind of call it quits for this review?
I think that the first core does a really good job of establishing the world. Basically, my short review is that it does a really good job of showing what kind of life they have here, and it gives a good introduction to the characters and what they're about, at least the ones who survived.
Yeah, and it gives decent hints at which parts of the extended cast we will probably see more of later, because we get some decent minor characterization for folks like Annie, especially in the scene where she and Eren are doing the hand-to-hand combat training. Like, that will come up later, but it's still a good moment to show off her character a little bit. And we see a little bit more with Bertholdt and the other guy. What's his name?
Reiner.
A little bit of some of the other extended characters. Maybe I'm a hater. Maybe I just have no sense of humor. But Sasha completely did not work for me in this rewatch.
You are a hater. Potato Girl is
You're
best
a
girl.
hater. You're a hater.
It's like, I think the potato gag is great, but everything else, like, the potato gag is good. Okay, maybe I'm a partial hater, but everything else with Sasha, I was like, it just didn't hit for me this time. I'm sorry.
That scene,
Sasha's entire motivation is she is a hungry girl.
Yes.
I get it, and I respect that.
That
she
scene
is basically
where...
Hungarian.
Shut up.
Please laugh.
The scene where Marco is trying to give a pep talk to that soldier, and he's like, yeah, look at Sasha. She's the perfect soldier. Look at her. She's keeping it cool. And she's like, nope, just put me on the cart with the wounded. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And starts crying. I was like, yeah, that's a mood. I can't say I wouldn't have done the same.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe she'll get back in my good graces later, but it did stand out to me a little bit more that Connie is the one that reacts to things. It's like he's the reactor character. I think there's a good balance here between our primary POVs and the rest of the cast. So it's looking forward to seeing more in the next part of what I have forgotten happened and what I remember happening, and seeing if it hits the same. So we will see.
I think that this is definitely probably the worst part of the rewatch, because Trost is very slow when you're rewatching it. But I am looking forward to the next parts, because they start to branch out into the world a little bit more.
Funny that you struggled with this, because I know what I struggled with most last time, I think, is coming up soon.
Okay.
Or maybe that's season 2 and I just can't remember right. But something that I know, I was just like, is coming up soon-ish.
An ick on Titan. All right, so in typical Third Impact fashion, I do want to ask you guys, what do you think is the most iconic scene of this chunk of episodes? I'm going to go with it's the potato scene. That's the one for me. It's Sasha eating the potato, and that's it. Because everybody knows it's really the Colossal Titan peeking over the wall, but that's too easy. Not going to say that one. It's the potato scene.
For me, I think the one where they're being attacked by the other squad, the yelling guy, and Eren goes to protect Mikasa and Armin, and he turns into that like weird muscly skeleton. And it like hyper fixes on the eye for like a minute. It's just like really weird and creepy. I think for me it's that one.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think for me it's the not the first Colossal Titan peaking scene, but the second one, because it's totally very different. And honestly, the first time I watched it, it made me laugh because
it's kind of funny.
It's kind of funny. Yeah, that too. But it's just kind of funny because, and I'm lumping in the end of that episode with the beginning of the next episode, because Eren is like monologuing, and it has such a hopeful tone of he overcame how difficult training was for him, and everybody's doing great. They had such a good class, and he feels empowered. And he's like, we can do it. They can't surprise us again. And then they surprise them again.
Yes.
And like, it's even less like, it's more just, hello, I'm here, than the first time, where the first time is like they hear the lightning crash, they see the hand, and he slowly lifts himself over the wall, and you're like, whoa. But this time it's just like lightning pop, and he's there, and everybody is just like jaw gaped, and then they get blasted off. It's very funny.
It's very much the Timmy Turner school of what could possibly go wrong.
Yeah, basically. And and like he then tries to 1v1 the Colossal Titan, which, as we learn later, would not have worked out for him. But for reasons he had no idea about yet.
And talk about another intriguing scene to set up some mystery. You know, he runs up the guy's arm and like tries to attack him, and then he just vanishes.
Pop. Yeah, exactly. That's
Again,
the thing
this
that
show
like,
is very good at little things like that. I don't know if they all pay off, but that is one of the central intrigues about this first season, is that there's a lot of little splashes of intrigue of like, okay, how does that work? What is going on? What am I looking at? That sort of thing.
No, the intrigue and mystery is what's really captivated me with this show, and that's what captivates me with everything. I judge shows so much on like how good the delivery of a mystery is, like how the payoff is, and if it's not good, I will eviscerate a show when I like talk to people about it. But I'm not going to talk about that here yet. But yeah, they did such a good job with building the mystery of like, how did the Colossal Titan disappear? Why are some of these Titans substantially different from these other Titans that we've seen for the past 100 years? Or, you know, why can Eren turn into a Titan? Stuff like that.
Yep. All right, well, I think on that note, we're looking forward to doing the next part probably pretty soon. We want to have that out around March, I think, is our goal. So hopefully, and maybe even sooner, we'll just see how it's going. We will not be producing new episodes of this full series review straight through. We're definitely going to have content that is not Attack on Titan related as episodes in the in-between times. But look forward for us, you know, continuing to get through this show over the next year or so, however long it takes us to get to the end. But thank you guys for joining me on this episode. It's been really fun to sort of go back in time in my own anime fandom experience and go back to a show that I was really into for a decent chunk of time and see how I feel about it now. So it's been fun and I can't wait to do it again. Ryan, where can people connect with you on social media if they so choose?
So I've been taking a major break from social media, except through my TikTok account, where you can find me at Bowie Sensei. Let me double check that real quick because I don't look at my name that much.
RYA.
Okay. Yeah. So you can find me on TikTok at Bowie Sensei. That's BOWIESENSEI. And you'll know it's me when you see a picture of a dog.
Tori, where can people find you? Tori, you can find on Blue Sky at Worst Waifu. Don't you love it when the audio cuts out? I am also on Blue Sky at Ars Arcantum. If you don't know how to spell that, you can find it in the show notes. And that's where I spend most of my time, in addition to the Third Impact Anime Discord, which you are invited to join. It's a nice place to be. We have great conversations about stuff on the daily. It's pretty active, so you should totally join. You can find more information about Third Impact Anime by visiting our website, thirdimpactanime.com, where we will have show notes for this episode and a catalog of all of our previous episodes for your listening pleasure. If you're listening to this on a platform that allows you to review or rate podcasts, we would really appreciate you doing that for us. It would really put a smile on our face. If you'd like to support us financially, we do have a Patreon. That is patreon.com/thirdimpactanime, where we have some very modest rewards, or just the ability to basically give us a tip every month. A colossal thanks to both Tori and Ryan for joining me on this episode.
I was happy to be here.
Always a pleasure.
We will see you in the next one.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.